Hello, welcome to the SAU Report. I'm Hardy Bates.
And I'm Megan Black. Our guests today on this media roundtable are Helen Aleksandrova and Drew Farley. Today we'll be discussing media coverage on a variety of issues. Helen, what kind of news interests you?
Well, news play a very important part in my life, and for me, I always try to find some news about politics, foreign politics, and of course some local issues. And it's the first place. I mean, I'm not a politician, but I don't know why. I like it. So the second place, it's entertainment, basically music and some art exhibitions. So I always try to find out what what are the novelties in this sphere.
So Drew, what about you?
I'm mostly into sports and entertainment, and I try to keep my head inside the world news, but mostly just sports and entertainment.
Well, Drew, where do you go to find your news?
Well, I really love sports, so ESPN mostly, but a lot of times I'll be flipping through and watch channels like E! And Fox News and CNN and cable news networks.
Helen, where do you find your news?
Well, when I'm in Russia, I just watch TV because we have a lot of news briefs during the day, and also we have Euronews channel, and they broadcast news without any stops, 24 hours. But of course, now when I'm in America, basically I find my news only in internet. So in some Russian websites, when I want to, for example, when I want to check my email, there is before entering the password and login, you say, you just you can see a lot of articles in Russian, some news.
So Helen, which news events do you think should receive the most, and which do you think are not receiving enough?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in every country it's different. Because I've been to Russia and to America and to Europe, Germany, and also England, and coverage is different in every country. So, which country do you mean? Because there are differences. So.
Here in the United States.
In the United States, well, I think that you devote too much time to your celebrities, because all these issues, Anna Nicole Smith, and I don't know, some comedian, he somehow said something wrong. I didn't get it, but because I didn't pay attention to it. So I think probably you should reduce the time you devote to this kind of questions. But basically, and you don't pay much attention to the news outside America, like world news. Of course, you highlight the big issues, like, for example, the war in Iran, or, I don't know, Yeltsin's death, for example. I saw it in American news. So basically, I think less time for celebrities and more time to politics.
Drew, what do you think should have more coverage or less coverage in American news?
Well, like Anna said, we do devote a lot of our news and to people in entertainment and actors and things like that. But there's obviously a market out there for it. People are watching it, and people are buying magazines with news information in it. So I think it's just really the times. Back in the late 60s and 70s and stuff, they didn't have tabloid magazines and things like that to read, so they focused more on world news. But now that we have those, we read those and get our information from there.
Okay. Helen, being an exchange student, how does the news coverage here in the United States differ from where you're from in Russia?
Well, it is different. For example, sometimes I read some articles in Russian from Russian newspapers, and some articles from American newspapers, but of the same topic. And actually, it's a bit funny because, for example, we can put the whole quotation. Like, for example, when Gates, it's the head of the Pentagon, I think, he was defending the American budget for 2008, and like in Russian newspapers, they published the whole quotation, and American didn't. And the whole quotation, he tried to gain some more money, and he said that our situation with such countries like Iran, Russia, Northern Korea, and was the last one? In China is very bad, and we probably will have military conflicts. It's the whole quotation, but I haven't found it in American newspapers. So like Russian newspapers and Arabian newspapers, they published the whole speech of Gates, and American newspapers didn't. And the same we do also. We also cut, for example, some quotations. So basically, I think both your publicity and our publicity is dependent, and it's not free. Well, I mean 100% free.
What other differences do you find? I know that you mentioned earlier that you also have been to England and Germany. Do you find any other differences with American news coverage in those countries?
Well, I can't see some striking differences, but they also pay less attention to celebrities. But they, like for example, in England they have Victoria Beckham and David Beckham, and so of course a lot of space is devoted to them, but basically it's more or less the same.
Right. Well, you mentioned how we have a lot of coverage on celebrities. Andrew, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the Anna Nicole Smith tragedy. Could you elaborate on it? How do you feel about the coverage?
To a certain extent, Anna Nicole Smith was a star, and her death was pretty shocking and stuff. But I think that coverage now has gone from being the national nightly news to 24-hour cable news networks. So they don't have as many stories to run. So something like Anna Nicole Smith is something they can run to fill a couple hours up with all the stories about what she died from, and her baby, and who's her baby's father and stuff. That fills a lot of time for these 24-hour cable news networks.
And Helen, you mentioned earlier about the comedian, I think you're referring to Don Imus.
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
And he, I believe, had a scandal with involving the Rutgers basketball team.
There was something like racism or something.
It had to do with the comment he made towards the Rutgers basketball team. Do you think that should have had as much media coverage, or you said you didn't really pay any attention to that?
I think no, because it's a comedian. He jokes, he says nonsense, and you should pay attention to your politicians, I think. I mean, to local issues, because I would rather use this time and tell people about other countries or about your own country, because every country has problems and people should know about them. So, no.
So if a scandal like that had happened in Russia, it wouldn't have had coverage like that?
No, of course not. The difference is, the main difference, that we don't go to the court as often as you do. So it's like, for example, if I say something wrong here, someone can say, aha, I will go to the court, I will suit you. In Russia, it's just, what? You pay more money for the court than you have, finally. So, of course not, no one would pay attention.
Andrew, what is your take on the Imus situation?
Well, Imus is a comedian, but he also is on a syndicated, nationwide radio show, and nowadays you have to really watch when you're in the news what you say, so you don't offend people. You have to watch what you say about African Americans, Arabs, Asians, and even homosexuals and stuff. You have to watch what you say about that, and it's made the news a lot tighter in what they actually say now compared to what they used to say.
And spawning off of the Imus situation, Russell Simmons has come out with his hip-hop theory. Drew, do you have any take on that, the hip-hop conference, and what Russell Simmons is trying to do?
I think this is a good project that he's starting up. It's just a group that he has got together of fellow rappers and producers and people in the hip-hop industry trying to change the image of hip-hop and the language they use because of this Don Imus situation. But it's good that this is a totally different culture of people. You know, the hip hop culture is a different culture from politicians and other cultures in America, and they're finally getting, you know, recognition from the news organizations.
Okay, do you feel as if though that they're covering the whole hip hop theory with Don Imus? Is that too much or is it too little?
I feel it's gotten too much. It definitely needs to be covered, but like I was saying, with the 24-hour cable news networks, only a few, you know, you're running a couple big stories and mostly local stories off of that's happened in local parts of the nation. So with those when a big scandal like that happens, they have to, you know, they just keep giving you information that you've heard over and over again, and I feel like sometimes it's just time to move on to a new and different subject.
Well, Helen, I know one of the big national stories in the news lately has been the Virginia Tech tragedy. And when it first happened, do you believe that the American news system covered the story too much or too little? How do you think the media handled that tragedy? And do you think that the Russian media would have handled it any differently?
Well, Virginia Tech was a great tragedy. I mean, we're all students, and just, you know, and to be victims of a crazy guy, it's just a very great tragedy. And of course, it should have covered very much in news and all of this. But I'm not sure about Russian media. I think we would do the same, because like here, as I saw here, there was news brief every 5 or 10 minutes telling, you know, just giving some more details or repeating the same things they have already told. And I think it's quite fair that they spend that much time. I'm not sure about other things, like I remember just maybe next day or in some hours there were videos from this guy who killed a lot of people. I don't remember his name, this Northern Korea guy, and he, as far as I remember, he sent some videos, and the channels just broadcasting the videos, well, a part of them, and I'm not sure that it was good. I mean, of course, everyone wanted to know what happened and what stood behind him, why he decided to do it, but, you know, I think that was too much, because it's like maybe there are other crazy people who would, you know, watch the CNN, for example, and look at it and say, wow, this guy showed, you know, and wow, this guy with a gun, and he actually reached the things he had planned to reach. So I think they shouldn't have done it. I mean, broadcasting these movies which he sent.
Drew, what's your take on the issue?
Well, with tragedies, it's always really difficult to say what is too much and too little. We've seen that with, you know, 9/11 attacks and the Oklahoma City bombing. With this one, you know, they did get a little graphic showing people being carried out of buildings and stuff, but the young man, he definitely wanted to get his message out, because he sent the video straight to NBC. It's not like they found him. So NBC, having received those, I see why they would want to put him out and get his story out. But I believe the students had a backlash against NBC. They said that they didn't want to see that on the air, so NBC took it off, which I think was respectful. But a tragedy it seems to always be the hardest, because people who are not personally affected want to know as much information and see as much as they can out of it. But if you're personally affected in that tragedy, it seems to be a lot harder to see those images.
And also, I read in newspapers, in internet, that FBA said that it was really bad that that MSN, what was the channel which showed it?
I believe they sent it to NBC. I'm not sure what the channel was.
So that NBC had showed it, because like FBI is investigating this issue and this case, and they said that they needed privacy, you know, and so basically it didn't do well.
Well, Helen, how do you feel the follow-up after the VTech tragedy? How do you feel the coverage has been with the follow-up, as far as with, you know, how the students have been able to cope with life after what happened?
Well, I can't even imagine, because I try to put myself into their shoes, and I think for me it will be very difficult to see, to see something which reminds me about this tragedy in the news. But it's on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think you should remind people, just to be, because to prevent another tragedy. So, it's like, two sides of one.
Well, Andrew, how do you feel about that?
I'm kind of with Helena. She said it very well, that, and you're a student and you've just gone through this tragedy, and you're seeing it all over news stations and stuff, and the news has gotten to where that it's not even just on news shows anymore. A popular show is TRL on MTV. They've had news briefs on there, describing what's been going on. So it must be a very hard situation to not be able to get away from it. But I think the news has done a great job of showing the triumph over it, how people have recovered over it.
Well, since that there are different aspects of news, here recently in the international community, there's been an altercation between Iran and Great Britain with the capture of British soldiers who were later released. But Helen, being an international student, how do you feel that the coverage was shown from the Western aspect and how it was shown from the Arabic aspect?
Well, here I'm taking international relations course, so that's why I sometimes read the Al Jazeera and other newspapers, like translation from Arabic. And I read a lot of newspapers in British newspapers, and also Arabic newspapers. And Iran claimed, and actually it is highlighted very much in the Iran's newspapers, that British soldiers they crossed the border, and Iran is an independent country, and so if, for example, America now occupies Iraq, it doesn't mean anything. So that's why they wanted to show off, just to show that we are still strong. And also they used the British soldiers kind of like an example of good Western life, because they showed I believe there was one woman in this crew, among the soldiers, and she's a smoker, and they showed her smoking in the TV, and says, "Look, women of Iran, what British women look like." And they put a scarf on her head, and they also said, in every newspaper there was a passage, a paragraph, for example, and for British people, women are nothing, because they send them to the work, and not to work, not to normal work, but to fight, to military. So that's how they showed it. And they also showed, Iranians, they had some TV programs where they showed British soldiers sitting on the carpets and smoking water pipe, drinking coffee, and they say, "Look, we take care of the soldiers, though they are our enemies, but we do." And in British newspapers, they said, everything but opposite, that Iran Iran captured these soldiers, and the conditions were bad, and all this stuff.
Okay, well, we know that media coverage has a great deal of how people perceive things, and here lately, as in 2008, we'll be having our next presidential election, and we would I want to ask, how do you feel that the coverage has been, as far as how does that help the candidates? How vital is the media coverage?
Well, in Russia it is vital, because we're a big country, and there are a lot of places where you can't find internet. There's just no access, because no satellite or something, So for us, television plays an important part in our lives, and all our candidates, when the time comes to elect someone, they have a lot of videos, for example, like saying, I am the cool, I will do this, I will do that, like vote for me, vote for me. And they also have meetings, and they have, for example, these meetings are covered in news, so that's how we can find. And so they have a lot of talk shows where they can, tell about their programs and just tell a bit more things about the things they are planning to do. And also we had one interesting case in Russian history. Like there was a political party without any mottos, practically, without it just appeared, and they had a lot of videos, like advertising videos, and they won just because people watched these videos and they were happy.
Well, Drew, how do you think the media affects or will affect the 2008 political campaign here in America?
Well, it's always had an effect on it, starting with newspapers and moving into radio. And now in television you have not only debates between the candidates, but you have their little TV commercials where they tell what they're about or what their opponent's about. And they go on shows on the news broadcast and are interviewed that way. And it helps people out a lot more seeing someone on TV and hearing what their form is to get people out and vote.
Well, and media is always an ever-changing entity, Drew. Where do you think that it is headed in the future?
Well, the newspaper industry has really gone down, and it's because a lot of people are getting their news off the internet, off of yahoo.com, or going to a newspaper and buying the newspaper online. So I really see that going, people getting their news from their desk or from their, just from their computer than having to go to the newsstand and buying a newspaper. And I kind of see that going with news broadcast. Instead of having to wait till 5 o'clock to see your local news or the nightly news, you can get on your podcast with your iPod or just get on the internet and get on the website and download it at your time and what time you want to see it.
Okay. Helen, in Russia, how do you think news will change or the ability to get news here in the future?
Well, I agree with the ideas that all the news broadcasting will go to internet. But I think it's just a question of time in Russia because internet is not that popular. But it's just a question of time. And also, I search a lot on internet, and I can see that some newspapers, like for example, the Washington Post, so you can't read for free. You should subscribe, and some papers you should pay, or you should be at least you should be subscribed. So, internet is the future.
Well, the internet is very vast, and it's an open market full of information. But how do you feel about? Should there be some constraints as far as with the internet? Are there constraints in Russia?
Well, I haven't seen any, so I think it's just it's free without any borders. But of course there must be constraints. For example, porno sites, all of that, these topics. So
I think that's why people get their news from the internet so much. There's no middleman. You're getting it straight from the source. There's nobody putting maybe their spin on it, or you're seeing it from one side or another. You get the straight, hard facts, and you just get the information on that. That's why so many people enjoy the internet.
Okay. Helen, I know you talked about earlier that you don't really have any legal constraints on your news, but do you have any other constraints or on the internet, do you have any other constraints as far as with your newspapers or any other media in Russia?
Well, I believe they have, really, because, news sometimes is so different compared with the newspapers. And, but, legally, we have no constraints. But, of course, there are some newspapers which are more or less, westernized, and some papers which, more or less presidentinized, if we can say so. But no legal constraints.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you all for being here today on the SAU Report.
And thanks for watching.